Hey guys, I'm Mono and this is Book of Demons Hellcard, an upcoming roguelike deck building game from developer ThinkTrunk. Hellcard takes some basic concepts from Slay the Spire, which is at this point the king of deck building games, and puts its own twist on the formula by adding co-op to the mix, as well as a fairly basic but engaging positioning system where enemy position plays a major role in how some interactions play out. There's currently a demo out for this game on Steam, so check that out after the video if you think you might be into this. And I would like to thank the developers by giving me a copy of the game to review. So if you've never played Slay the Spire or other deck building games, then here's the basic rundown. You start off with a set of basic cards that allow you to deal or block damage. After each combat or through some events, you gain new better cards that have a higher numerical value or have additional interactions, like say deal damage to multiple enemies or deal more damage if the last played card was an attack, and so on. Since this is a roguelike, combat encounters are randomized, and so are your card rewards, events, bosses, and more. As you progress through your game, you start to refine your deck by removing your worst cards and upgrading your other cards, as well as gaining other bonuses from artifacts or items. This is all fairly standard for most of these types of games, so the way Hellcard stirs things up is, as I mentioned, by adding co-op and a positioning system. Let's talk about the latter first. There's essentially two different positions for an enemy to be at in Hellcard, either near or far, which is defined by a ring around your character or characters. Most cards take this into account in one way or another, so basic warrior attacks will deal 2 damage to near enemies or 1 to enemies that are far away. Other cards allow you to move an enemy from one position to another or have other effects related to this basic system. It's not a mind-blowing level of complexity by any means, but it does add a nice layer of strategy to the game. There are some cards which will deal AoE damage in a specific area on the combat arena, like an arc or a circle which you can move around the combat area. So there is some RNG when it comes to you being able to target 2 enemies or 5 enemies with these attacks, because where the enemies are actually standing is pretty much random. Then there's the whole co-op part of the game, which means you're not just playing with one deck of cards at a time from a specific character, but rather multiple decks which complement each other. There's 3 different character classes with different starting health, and decks which fall into the basic archetypes of mage, ranger, and warrior. Warriors are good at close range, rangers at long range, and mages have some utility and support abilities. As it stands right now, there's 2 characters of each class in the game, each having a specific twist on the archetype. So for example, the regular warrior can provide a lot of block for other heroes, while the berserker will be able to play more cards the next turn after taking damage this turn, and has more damage heavy cards in general. So you choose one of these starters to play in either multiplayer or single player mode. In multiplayer, each player will pick a character and manage their cards and other choices. In single player mode, you are limited to picking cards only for your character, but in combat you will see 2 cards at a time from your companions, which you can then choose to play. After playing a card, you will see another until that companion runs out of energy and you're not able to play any more cards. Not sure why you only get to see 2 cards instead of their entire hand. I guess it's to reduce the complexity of not having to deal with 15 cards per turn, but I don't know, it's a kind of weird choice, but it does work. This is in fact where one of my complaints about the multiplayer mode comes in. You can't see the other player's hand, which is actually extremely important to your overall strategy each turn. So let's say someone has a powerful AoE card that can kill multiple enemies and someone else has a bunch of block cards. If you can use that AoE card to kill the enemies that are attacking, then you won't really need to block, so knowing what to play and when is absolutely key. However, since you can't see the other player's cards, you need to start each turn by going over what everyone has in order to devise a strategy, at least if you're working together with friends and playing over Discord. That makes combats drag a bit more than they should, so hopefully they add the feature to look at the cards at some point. I've actually asked the devs about this, They have considered adding an opt-in feature to show your cards to other players, and that they have, at least for now, removed the ability because they didn't want a single player to start taking control of everything, and that this was a hotly debated topic both between the devs themselves and in the community. Moving on, before each combat you get to choose a path which determines two things. First, the type of enemies that you will encounter in the next combat, and second, the shop-like reward screen that you get to see after said combat. So unlike other games where some destinations might exclude combat altogether, that is not the case here. Combat happens every time, and after that you get to see the location that you selected. Different locations have different rewards, so for example, a sage location will allow you to remove cards, or a vault will give you different ways to get an artifact. Any action here will require the use of gems, which is a currency that you get after each combat. Your choices are often to choose to spend one gem for a random reward type, so upgrading a random card or getting a random artifact, for example. Spending more gems allows you to direct that upgrade to a specific card or to choose the artifact that you want from a pool of 3. Knowing when to save up gems and when to spend them seems key to the overall winning strategy, so if you already have good cards, upgrading any random card might be a good idea. But if you're struggling each combat, then maybe targeting that upgrade using more gems can make a huge difference. Since this is a co-op game, everyone gets to choose a destination, and at the end, you get to access all 3 destinations chosen. Same goes for the enemies that are part of that location. So when you enter a combat, the arena gets populated by a bunch of different enemies according to each of the different locations chosen. And there can be many enemies each combat. As you get deeper into the run, you start seeing so many enemies that it would be hard to keep track of what's going on if it weren't for the fact that the UI does a pretty good job at summing things up for you. It's easy to see how much damage each player will be receiving, though sometimes you can't really tell at a glance which enemy is responsible for which damage, which is a bit annoying. Hopefully they add like a mouse hover in ability where if you hover over an enemy you see like a arrow or something pointing at the target that they are attacking. I think that would be a good way to solve this. Enemy design is a bit on the weak side, I would say, but I know it's still evolving and being worked on. So for example, some enemies have some unique way of attacking. There's a bull-like enemy that will deal damage when they charge through you, but that damage and the way it works is independent of the animation itself, if that makes sense. So you could change that enemy for one that attacks and then moves after attacking, and it would pretty much behave the exact same way. So yeah, some enemies can only attack if they are in the near area, some only if they are outside. But in a way, enemies just don't feel as uniquely designed as in games like Slay the Spire, which is my main point of comparison. In Slay the Spire, each of them have a very visually distinct art, but also very specific attack patterns, while in Hellcard, enemies have a pool of available actions, but choose between those actions at random. Some actions have a higher chance of occurring than others, but ultimately whether an enemy will attack, buff, move, or do something else is completely random. In one match, in fact, I had enemies only attack in the last round after buffing for the entire combat, which is kind of disappointing, but I am confident that they can work through those issues as they get more and more feedback from the community. Over the course of the last few months, I've seen some pretty big updates to the game, with improvements to the UI, to the cards, to the enemy behavior, and so on. And it gives me an optimistic outlook on what this game might look like when it finally releases. I think it needs some tweaks to the overall experience, especially in terms of that post-combat reward screen, which I think needs to be more focused. So for example, having fewer but more meaningful options rather than having 9 different things to choose from. But apart from that, it's a pretty neat little game and something fun to play with friends that's different from anything else. So that part is pretty appealing. And alright, that's gonna be it for this video. Let me know what you think about this down in the comment section, and if there's any other deck builders out there that you would like to recommend, please leave those comments below. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and as always, Thank you for watching, and I hope I will catch you in the next one.